Okay, so there's this thing been going around where people have decided that all of our monuments are evil and we're tearing them down. So does the Bible say anything about tearing down altars? And the question says, of history, question mark, and then of the Lord, question mark. So obviously we've been watching the news and you have people that decide whether it's Abraham Lincoln or whether it's a Civil War racist guy. They're just ripping them down and saying that it's all evil. Does the Bible address anything about that?
Well, the Bible talks about the fact that we're not supposed to have false gods. We're not supposed to have idols and that kind of thing. Tearing down altars in the Old Testament were altars to pagan deities.
Right.
They're not altars to anything else. And so it's altars to Baal. For example, places where children were sacrificed. They literally sacrificed children to Baal and Molech and those kinds of places. And so I guess if you want to tear down an altar in that kind of sense, you should go down to your local abortion clinic and tear it down. But obviously, in our culture, that's not going to be taking place. And so I don't know if this person has had that whole idea of tearing down altars used on them to justify tearing down statues. I got some statues that I would tear down. How about Lenin? Isn't there a statue of Lenin over in Seattle?
I do not know. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure there is.
I can Google it while we're talking.
And so it's like that guy's responsible for millions of deaths. And so, when I look at some of this stuff, I like history. And so I don't put people in ancient times or people in the Middle Ages or people even in the 19th century into my cultural context. That's not fair, and that's not a good way to look at history. And so, it's like I pay attention to those things. And so
you're correct. There's a 16-foot bronze statue of communist revolutionary Vladimir Lenin in Seattle.
Let's go tear that puppy down. That guy caused the destruction of the property and the lives of so many people. You can't count them. And there he is in Seattle. That's ridiculous. In any case, when I look at historical figures, it's like I look at them with a realistic concept. There was an Englishman. Gosh, I'm blanking on his name. It was during the period of time when they got rid of the monarchy, and I'm blanking on his name. In any case, he was. It'll come to me. He was having a portrait made of himself, and at the time. Portraits, it's right on the tip of my tongue, man. At the time, portraits, were done like a lot of pictures are done. If you get your class pictures done in modern times, they go through and retouch them. Well, when he was being painted, he told the artist, "I want you to paint me as I really am, warts and all." And just making the point that he didn't want any false representation of him. And so when I look at historical figures, I look at them warts and all, and I understand that there's a context for these guys, and there's a reason that they did certain things at certain times. For example, first time I read the Constitution, there's a clause in there that talks about slaves being 3/5 of a man. And the first time I read that, I was like, what in the world? I was offended when I read it, until I realized the political situation. And the political situation was that they were trying to bring together a unity of the North and the South colonies. And in the South, they wanted slaves to have full voting rights, or actually full rights as far as being counted as a person for representation in the Congress. But they didn't want to give them voting rights. And so what ended up happening was the northern colonies said, we're not going to do that. And there was a hard line that was being put down where they weren't going to count slaves at all because it gave the South more power. And they came up with a compromise because what they were looking for was a union to resist the British, and they refused to give them a full person for the census so that they wouldn't gain inordinate power in the Congress. And so that was actually an anti-slavery position in the Constitution. It wasn't pro-slavery, and it wasn't racist. They were trying to stop the South on one level or another. And so again, you gotta have a context for these guys. With some of the monuments in the South, some of my family came from the South. And one of the things about Americans is they love an underdog. And so most of the people that I have ever known that looked at Lee, Robert E. Lee as a hero, they didn't do it because they didn't see him as that because of slavery. They saw him as that because he wanted to honor the state that he came from, Virginia, and it wasn't an issue of slavery with the guy. And so
most people don't know that Abraham Lincoln asked him to fight and lead the North.
Right, exactly.
Before he did and decided he's going to represent his state.
Right, exactly. And so that's what a lot of people in the South are looking at. And I'm not saying that there aren't people who aren't tweaking that and actually being racist. I've known racists in every place that I ever lived. But I think that we need to have some historical context. One of the things that you're seeing with tearing down a lot of these statues, they tore down Frederick Douglass of all things. The guy's a black guy, a freed slave who went around preaching about the fact about abolition. And they've torn down statues of abolitionists, torn down, Lincoln and that kind of thing. And there is just no. This is not an anti-slavery issue when that kind of stuff is going on. It's an anti-America issue. And so you don't want to be fooled by the nonsense that some of the leftists are pulling.
So like in Joshua 4, where the Lord has him set up, the 12 stones to remember.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's any aspect of the fact that, when you have those things, especially you're walking with your family and your kids are like, hey, what's that? It points to the mistakes you've made so that you don't make them again and where you came from. And it's not even having anything to do with I'm for this or not or racist or not. It's just like, this is what people did.
Right. That's what history is about. Right. It's like you go through and you look at history, and you need to be interested enough to know, exactly what was going on. And so I think that also some of that, especially in the years not too long after the Civil War, was to bring a rapprochement between the North and the South. And so you don't get to just, when you beat somebody at something, and especially when you're talking about warfare, if you want to reunite a group of people, you don't pound them into the dirt. And so there was probably a lot of that going on in situations. Again, it's like when I look at this stuff, I keep a reasonable mind in regard to these things, and history is history. And so I can look at the mistakes that the South made and see them as mistakes. I can look at mistakes that the North made and see them as mistakes. One of the things that you have with the founding documents is they were always looking forward to the fact that the problems that we have in our nation were going to go away because of the freedoms that were given in the Constitution, and they're stated in the Declaration of Independence. These guys did not think that having white men be free was the fulfillment of all men are created equal in the sight of God. They did not think that. The reason that those statements were put there was because that's what they were reaching forward to. And all you got to do to understand that is actually read the writings of these guys. I was just going through reading some of the letters of Washington the other day, and he had that kind of attitude. So.
People that they don't understand, they think, oh well, they're racist because they had slaves and this and that. And it's this idea today is, okay, I want to stop abortion. Mm-hmm. It's a legal thing in the States. How am I going to do that?
Right.
Like you said, they were putting that in as a moral future possibility with a moral and virtuous society, that this is where we're going. Mm-hmm. But as far as the laws goes and stuff like that, it'd be like me going, okay, abortion's done, as if I have any power to do that. And if I went in there with force to try and stop it, like what's that going to do? And they were in the same position.
Yeah,
they wanted it to go away, but they were stuck within the culture that they were confined in and the laws that they had.
Yeah.
They weren't necessarily racist.
Right.
They were stuck in it.
And when you look at that, that's a great comparison, because in one situation, you have people who are being oppressed. In another situation, you have people who are being torn apart. And you have whole groups of people in our country that don't think twice about babies being torn apart,
right,
and what that says about our culture. And so again, you got to keep it in mind. I can imagine that people from our future might look back on some of us and wonder why we didn't do more to stop abortion.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Keep it in mind.